I was muted. Good morning, everyone. How's it going, Tiffany and Tevin?
Good
Good.
morning.
How are you, Robert? Good
I
morning.
am all right, doing well. Well, to our viewers, welcome back. I am on the road traveling, and so the show continues to go on. But this morning we have an important topic, and we'll dive right in. But really quick, if we could hear from you, Tevin and Tiffany, we're going to talk about mentoring and why it matters in our communities. And so this morning we want to start with introductions, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Tiffany, you can go first.
Okay. Well, good morning, viewers. My name is Tiffany Taylor. I am the founder of Mothers of Black Sons, based here in Athens, Georgia.
Hello, hello everyone. My name is Tevin Byers. I'm originally from Dayton, Ohio. I'm currently a full-time PhD student studying urban education studies, specifically looking at the advancement of Black males using mentoring, and also doing a lot of research on institutional barriers as well.
All right. Well, one of the things that we've seen in the news is not only a lot of violent crimes, but a lot of just crimes going on. And when we start thinking about the disproportionate number of African American youth and males, as Kevin and Tiffany both of you alluded to, how they're kind of tied into this idea of not finding productive spaces or finding themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, if we could we get to this idea of mentoring and how that can change the narrative for some young people. And so, if you all could talk about, what made you get involved with mentoring and what inspires you to stay involved in that space.
Mm. Tiffany, you mind if I go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So for me personally, I think I originally got into mentoring, or at least the idea of mentoring through sports. So I wrestled. I want to say I began wrestling around 6th or 7th grade. And we had a lot of Black male coaches as well. So coaches that were well experienced, not only in the sport of wrestling, but also in life as well. We had some veterans as coaches, people who seen a lot of different things. So it was really, I think that was the foundational part for me of being around someone that really didn't care. I don't want to say didn't care about like school, but at that time, like being young in that state, you don't just want to talk about school all the time. So they related to us on not just wrestling, but also in other sports as well. And I think that's when it kind of all began for me. And those same coaches are still in my life today, still checking up on me, still calling me, still Facebook friends and everything too. I owe a lot of my success to them. And I always say that they saved my life because they kind of put me on an alternative path from where I was headed. So that was for me. And I think as the time went on and I got more involved in education and keep seeking more degrees and things like that and higher learning and knowledge, I just started to see all the barriers that were in front of me and all the ones that continued to pay in front of me. Then and also try to figure out other ways that I can kind of give back and serve as that means of support to other upcoming wrestlers or other Black men too, going through the same things that I was during that time.
That's awesome, Tevin. That's awesome. I'm a native of Athens, Georgia, and I'm also a mother of 3 sons. And I saw the need of young Black boys in my community, needing a space where they can feel like they can be themselves, not only be themselves, but thrive in the passions that they love, right? A lot of our boys love basketball or football. And there's nothing wrong with basketball or football or any sport because being a part of a team, it teaches you things that you can use later on in life. But I really wanted our boys to know that they can be more than an athlete or a rapper. So I started Mothers of Black Sons because I wanted to introduce our boys to the men in our community that are and who has had that same dream of being an athlete, but went on to be an entrepreneur or went on to be valedictorian. And a lot of the young men in my community really haven't had the exposure or the want for college life if it's not playing a sport. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to expose our boys to the fact that you can go to college. You don't have to just go to college on a scholarship for sports, but you can go to college to be whatever it is that you want to be. You can pick up a trade. And just off of what you spoke about, Tevin, and still having those mentors in your life now as an adult, when you had as an adolescent, that's my goal with Mothers of Black Sons. I want these men to have a lasting effect on these young boys while they are elementary age, middle school age, even beginning high school age, that they can go back and resonate with what their coaches taught them or what their math teacher taught them, who had a lasting impression on them, in spite of what they see in their surroundings. And so that's why I got into the mentoring program, because I want our boys to know that you do have a future outside of what you see and outside of what's normal for your area.
You both kind of alluded to it, but what are the factors? And I think we know the answer to this, but it'll be good to hear it out loud and discuss some of the factors that you think are having our young males kind of stay off track or not be on track. We hear about rap music and a number of other things, but what are some of the things that you all are seeing in your communities that are getting our young people off track, in particular our young Black males?
Peer pressure. Peer pressure, not feeling accepted by those who they would originally want to be accepted by. So falling into who will accept them, whether they're making the right decisions or not. As long as I feel like I have a brotherhood, as long as I feel like I have friends that I can confide in, I don't, and I see this in a lot of the boys that I deal with. I see it in the midst of the program, where it's easier to hang out with the boys that are not making the best decisions, rather than hanging out with the boys that are. Because 9 times out of 10, those boys that are making the right decisions, they are under strict instructions from a parent, you know what I mean? Like a parent unit. They have rules, they have structures, whereas a lot of young men don't have structures. They don't feel like they belong. So it's easy to fall into that narrative of gangs or violence, dropping out of school, not feeling like school is going to be, helpful to them. It's just a waste of time. And that's what I see mainly, that they really don't feel like they have a place or an institute where they belong. What do you think, Tevin?
On top of that, I really like that how you ended that with belongingness. I think it's also I think it's also more of like self-identity, which kind of goes back into your point of just the barriers that kind of prevented them. So a lot of our young men that we're noticing, they may not have father figures in their life, Black father figures. Their teachers may not be Black men or Black women. So a lot of that, they're trying to find their identity on what they see. And that's very dangerous at times, especially if what you have is not productive in a positive way. So they are reflecting what they see often, and depending on the group that you're in, which goes back into peer pressure, that's all you're doing. So in their state of mind, this is what they're supposed to be doing, and that's okay. And it's just what it is. However, on the outside looking in, you're like, wait, there's other alternatives, there's other options for you, but that is reflected of what they see. So I think in order to reach young adults, to reach these men or these young men, is to try to change the environment as much as possible of what they're seeing, reinforce those values of like, okay, this is what you think that you see, and this is what's reality, right? And also breaking down. One of the things that I enjoy doing is breaking down trap music and drill music and hip hop music for them, because a lot of them, they listen to rap music and they be like, okay, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. But I think sometimes breaking down the lyrics is the most important thing, because sometimes 9 times out of 10, an artist is talking about self-medicating and depression and how they went through all of this. And they're taking it as like, oh, I can do those things to make me feel better, instead of like, okay, what are some kind of healthy coping mechanisms to kind of get through that? But again, what you're reflecting and what you're listening to is that person's way of redoing that. Like, I like to use Little Durk, and because I like to say, like, a lot of people look up to Little Durk and listen to his music, including me. But in his music, he's reflecting. He's getting that off his chest of like, okay, this has happened, this is wrong, this is messed up, but this is the way it is. But at least he's getting it out. There's so many young people out here that are not reflecting and that are not seeking therapy because it's not attainable, and it's not accessible as well in their communities, because it's not what they see and that's not what they're used to. So I think, and to be able to kind of flip that in a more progressive and more positive way, we have to find more ways to make things more attainable and accessible for them, so they can develop out of from just what they see. Because if you constantly see what you're seeing, good or wrong, 9 times out of 10, that's what's going to happen, because that's what you're replaying. That's what you're seeing on an everyday basis. And once you do things for, I think, what is it? Once you do things for 18, 19, 21 days straight, it becomes habit. And it's really hard to break habits.
You mentioned a key thing, Kevin, in the idea of therapy. And, I've been involved with a number of mentoring programs throughout my career in higher ed, as well as been a participant in a mentoring program as a young person. But you said a key thing around the therapy part. And as African-American community, we don't always subscribe to therapy as an option. But then you take it down to a mentoring program thing, logic, and it's even further distant as an idea. So, as you all, engage in these programs, start up these programs, participate with these young people, how do we include that piece as a norm, or how do we compensate for that as leaders of these programs that you all think? What do you all think?
That's a great question. I think personally, you have to make mental health and reflection a foundation part of your programming, even if it's something little. One thing I used to do when I was during my time at University of Florida with my first generation class, I think it was either one.
You had to mention that horrible school.
Don't do that. Go Gators. Don't do that. Just, you got to respect your roots. So one thing that I did with them, along with my TA, she was really good at every day we came in, and I think we did it twice, but the students would write out on a piece of like paper of the worst thing that kind of happened to them today. Then they'll basically write it down, because as you know, writing down helps you reflect of like really thinking about, okay, what kind of made me mad today? And you ball it up and, you shoot it in the trash can, so, and because that's you getting it out. Then on the opposite side of that, before we end class, okay, let's write out something positive about like what we're looking forward to or something that we're willing to accomplish. Now hang that up and stick that on your mirror and look at that every day. And that just encompasses being able to, one, reflect and think about a plan and think about a tangible plan to how you can get there. But I think often we kind of think about, I think mental health is not a one size fit all. I think it's something that has to be done in a progressive state, and that has to be done intentionally. So I think for programming use, you have to be able to come up with programming that is ingrained into developing young people that is okay to reflect, and use different movies, TV shows, media artifacts, whatever you got, whatever you need to show them like, bruh, it's okay to be hurt. It's okay to cry. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to isolate. But what can we do to improve this situation so that we're not self-destructing? And I think that needs to be the objective when we're creating programming surrounded by mental health.
I totally agree. We have had what's called level up peer meetings, where boys of middle school age, we just kind of sit in a, like, I guess you would call it a kumbaya circle. And we discuss the things that they see. We discuss the things that they see during their daily lives. things that they feel like they fit into, things that they feel like they don't fit into. And for the things that they feel like they don't fit into, we try to unpack those feelings. Like, why do you feel like you don't fit in? And how are some ways that you feel like you can fit in? And like you were saying, Tevin, mental health is like it's a really broad situation or circumstance. And not all of our boys have the same background. Not all of our boys, have one parent homes. Most boys have parents in their homes and they still struggle in some areas. And so in the level up circle, we just try to get all of it out. I encourage every participant to get out how they're feeling about it, because his neighbor may feel the same way and just be ashamed to say it. And so if you get it all out and you see that someone else is dealing with it as well, even if you don't mention it out of your mouth, if you can get the same help because they said it, and it'll just fall on you and you can deal with it, even if you want to come back and talk about it. We just allow them to, express themselves and just try to unpack how they can maneuver or how they can triumph through it. And so it's a beginning process, but it is having them, they're opening up more, and is producing a environment where there isn't I want to say there isn't anything that's blocking them from opening up and becoming not necessarily one, but they're being on the same level. I can't really express it the way say it the way I feel it, but it's opening up a narrative and a conversation to where when they leave out, they're still talking about it. And so I'll let you know how.
Yeah. I think what you're talking to that goes back to what Kevin mentioned earlier is that identity. And
Yeah.
many times as we're going through life, even as adults, our identity can shift, change. We go through code switching. And a lot of times, both of y'all talked about this as I'm a young man and I want to be in the cool gang, but I might be also struggling with aspects of my identity that challenges that whole idea of what that identity means in that space. And so, a lot of times I'm sure you all have seen this where young people will come to you and they're just like confused because I want to be this person, but I'm scared to be this particular person because it's not the popular thing. For example, I might be a young black male that likes to play piano, but that's not going to be a popular thing amongst that group and what
Mm-hmm.
that might mean for me. So, have y'all seen some of that or experienced it or, let's kind of, I guess, dive into that a little bit.
I see it personally a lot. Because here in Athens, there has been a surge of gang activity, and it's 13 and 14-year-olds that are carrying guns. I had an incident this week where at football practice, some of the participants were saying that they wanted to quit football because there were too many gang members on the football team, and that in the locker room, they felt like they were being bullied or they really couldn't say anything because those group of boys, like there was even an altercation where one young man hit another young man, and the young man was just too afraid, and I'm not going to say that he was afraid to retaliate. He walked away, which is the greatest thing that he could have done, because on a football team, you're a team. You can't win without each other. And I reached out to the football coach, and I told him what some of the participants were saying, that they didn't want to go back because they didn't want to have to argue and battle with someone that's on their team, despite of what you do outside of football. And so his actions are a little different than mine. But he was able to talk to one of the boys who was in the altercation. And I talked to him as well, and I expressed to him that you're always going to come up against oppositions in life. Life is not going to be easy. Life isn't easy for African American men, especially African American men that are pursuing dreams, who are, stepping out of the norm, even in high school, because these children are middle school playing for high school. So they're not even in high school yet. They're just middle schoolers playing for high school. And I told him that to be his authentic self, sometimes you have to walk away from the things that come up against you, and just find, but don't quit. Don't quit. Don't be afraid to not necessarily fight physically, but you fight with your presence. You fight with your athleticism on the field. That's how you fight. You don't have to. And he was scared that, like I said, there has been gang activity or with guns. And I assured him that I don't think that there would be like guns on school grounds. But I talked to him and told him, just don't give up. And we have to constantly remind our young boys to not give up, even the young boys that's in gangs. Because I was telling the young man, if you really knew what it took to be in a gang, you would be afraid, you would be terrified. Because here in Athens, we're just small Athens. There's not like gangs like that we see on TV. You're just looking for someone to have a brotherhood with, so you do awful things, right? And so I think I opened his eyes, and I spoke to his mom too about the whole gang. Like, just because you have a special handshake, you don't want that label. You don't want the label of being a gang member on you, because you're constantly going to be looked at in the light of a gang member, and that's not the light that you want to be looked at. I pray that it helped him. When he walked away, he seemed like he wanted to join mobs. So we'll see how it goes.
I think two emphases that I would highlight. One being, what was I going to say? One being resistance, and another one being choices. And I think that young people need to know the history of Black Americans' resistance, and
Yes.
Resistance against adversity. During your most hard times, like, there's still choices within that. And I think those are two emphases that we need to highlight, because there are choices. And unfortunately for Black men, young Black men and high schoolers and Black boys, they have to make appropriate choices all of the time, because one choice can basically ruin your life, can throw it away. And I think that's going back to resistance. That's the part of resisting the temptation to think that these individuals have your best thought in mind, or your best, like, whatever you want to do in mind. So I guess for me, I always, when I'm speaking to young people and when I'm giving back and I'm volunteering within my various of roles, I'm always like, hey, I'm not telling you anything that I wouldn't do myself. Anything that I'm not willing or I haven't done myself, I wouldn't put that on you either, right? So I wouldn't tell you to reach for the stars and grind all day or do whatever you need to do if I'm not willing to kind of do the same thing in those things. But in time that we have those choices, and not to say that all the time we're going to make the best choices, but I think that's the beautiful thing about life, is that we can restore and rebuild relationships and repair that to an extent. And I think sometimes that young individuals think that they have their whole life in front of them, and that one choice that they don't know is so severe, especially living in a place where, I'm just going to be honest, in the South, in Athens, Georgia, you probably got little margin to kind of mess up. Yeah. I think those are the two instances where they need to be able to know the importance of choices, and also being able to resist when adversity faced, because that's life. Like, we always are going to have to make choices. And I think getting accustomed to that is going to be great. Now, it is hard for me to say, because I have made some, I would say, illegitimate choices in my life, and I've grown to know that, but also notice that like, okay, this person isn't really my friend, or this person doesn't really have the best interest at heart. So I need to kind of step away. And that love and that relationship is still there, but I know like, okay, it's time for me to get up out of here. And I know that, you know, like I said, I'm from the west side of Dayton, Ohio, and I'm at that age where some of my friends are getting married. Some of them are going away to prison. Some of them are, you know, are dying in the street. And it's very unfortunate. So even me being far, far removed from that, it still hurts because we once walked the same street. We once, you know, called probably each other's moms, or we once played basketball out, you know, in the streets or whatever like that. But, and looking back on it with all the education and the experience and the knowledge and all the trauma to go along with it, it gives me a little bit more perspective. And sometimes it's very frustrating too. And I think that's why this work is so important. It's just frustrating because you see all of the barriers are in front of our young teens. And you're like, okay, look, you literally have to do this, or you literally have to do this. Like you have little room. So it's very hard at times and frustrating. And I think sometimes it's even hard for me because it's like, I come from this, I see this, I'm trying to get to here and still trying to create a way where this can get eliminated. But it's also in a way of like, you know, the streets is the streets and it's never going to go away because the streets is so great because with people who don't have anything, they feel attached, or they feel like they have a family or protected. And 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. Street code is non-existent anymore. People don't know what they're doing. We've seen so many kids overdose on drugs, and it's just not the case. And I think that those are the things, making choices and being able to resist when adversity hits.
And, you know, I want to touch on this really quick if we could. You know, there are times, and we've all seen this in our own lives and our own families, where we'll have a particular individual who makes that choice to go, you know, what I call as a small business owner. People call them drug dealers. I call them small business owners, and I'll tell you why. Everybody wants to eat. Everybody wants to take care of their family, right? And if I got kids over here and I got a family to take care of, and I see my mom struggling, I want to make sure they're okay. So I'll make this choice to go and to be a small business owner, and I'll be a street pharmacist. What do you say to the kid that's in that state? Because their hands are tied. I'm seeing my mom struggling. We're hungry. I got my brothers and sisters. I got these kids to take care of, my family. I've got to do something quick. I got to do something different, and that's accessible.
And that's where the conflict of interest comes in for me, because this is just where I struggle at, is that the thought that I know better, but it's also in a sense like I have to do what I got to do. And it's so ingrained in me of just how I was raised and what I know now, and that like no one is coming to save you. And I honestly hate to think people are like, oh, you should, you know, just go to work or do this. And I'm like, you don't really, after taxes and after transportation and all these other things, you really have less than zero. It's easier to, you know, get some weed and resell that. And then the worst part about it is that people are getting rich legally off of marijuana distribution. So you see that, you're like, wait, hold on. Like, you know, you start to see people get money. So it makes you think you want to do it. Now, like I said, I just have some drawbacks to that, just because like I've been there and done things and I'm like, okay, it's just not it. However, that same mindset can be used for everything. I learned a lot just by the drug game, of just watching it, of watching movies and seeing people in my neighborhood do things like that. And it's a real live business of how they run it, down to the money management of it, down to the discipline of it. And I think that's what they need to see. And again, going back to us being pillars in our communities, that's why it's crucial for us to have relationships of like, look, man, I understand this is, you got to do what you got to do, but here's some alternatives to take this out and do it this way. So instead of, you know, like selling weed, maybe you get some, you know, I don't know, back in the day, it used to be blank CDs, and you getting your CDs off or something like that, of burnt CDs, because, you know, it's easier to get some burnt CDs or bootlegs or something like that. Just kind of finding your hustle of what works best for you. And I think it's just providing no options. However, it's just easier to get drugs than it is to get maybe like 100 copies of, I don't know, whatever you're trying to distribute. But that's a very hard conversation because the social services are limited and scarce.
Yeah.
And it just becomes a point where you like, you do have to figure out something. And 9 times out of 10 people don't want to see their families struggle and through that. But that is something I'm still dealing with and struggling with, because I just feel like America is already doing it. Like the world is already kind of making money and doing it in a way. Because I mean,
it interests me how certain populations, because you got a white piece of paper on the wall, you can give out opioids and other drugs.
mm-hmm.
But because I don't have that white piece of paper on the wall, I'm not licensed to do that. It's just, it blows my mind sometimes how certain populations get away with that stuff. But
yeah, I mean, just completely honest, growing up in the west side of Dayton, I've seen more drugs while I was in college and more successful than I am today than I've seen growing up in Townview, where I'm from. And I'll just let that be that. But I only saw maybe one drug come through the neighborhood where I was from. But you go into these white neighborhoods, there's all types of drugs and different things like that. And you're like, and they're dumb about it. And you're like, wait, this is control. And they never even get in a situation where they get risk of jeopardy, or even if they do, they have parents that kind of bail them out, or they have a social standing where they can kind of finesse their way out. Where going back to them choices, we don't have those same resources to kind of make something shake.
That's so true. I've seen even in my own household, my uncles feeling that, having that same feeling that they have to help, like their family is hungry. And, I can go out and get a job, but like you said, Tevin, after taxes, after all of the things are taken out, then I'm still left with nothing. And so it's easier. What I've learned and is, I don't know, because it is easier. It is easier to set up shop. But the consequences aren't the same. I've been in a courthouse where a black young man and a white young man both came forth with the same charges. The judge gave the white boy, he was able to go home with his parents. He expressed that his parents flew all this way, and the judge let him go with his parents. Whereas the young black boy, he was put on probation. And he also had to bond out of jail. He didn't have anybody at the courthouse with him, so he was taken back out by the sheriff. What I talked to the young boys in mobs about, as far as selling drugs and the easy money, is that it may come easy, but there's also a price to pay. And it's so crazy, because if you can say that but not really give a solution, like you were saying, Tevin, as far as the CDs, because when I was in high school, you could sell CDs. You make a lot of money selling blank CDs, mixed CDs. Whereas now the music is on your cell phone. And so what do we give our youth to sell, or because they can cut grass, but 9 times out of 10 they're not going to want to cut grass after the 50th or 60th yard or the 30th yard, right? So I do have a couple of mentors that have been in the same situation, that has that testimony of, like you, Tevin, them and their friends walked the same path. They were close, and now they have a best friend that's in jail or a best friend that's dead. And so they express to the young boys how, easy it is to get into, but how hard it is to get out of. And a lot of the mentors that has that testimony are now entrepreneurs, because they took what they had and they took what they saw, and they said, you know what, I'm not gonna do this. Going to jail is not for me. I have one mentor who has been arrested. I mean, I'm not A testimony is a testimony. You can't have a testimony without having a test. So my mentors have had tests, and they've triumphed through these tests. And so when they come to me and they say, well, I have a background. We all have a background. Did your background elevate you to the point where it led you to want to be a mentor now? Yes, ma'am. Well, that's all you need. That's all you need. Tell these boys what you went through and tell them how you got out of it and show them what you have made because you went through it and came out of it. And so I trust that process because it's a real process. Like, you can go on the public web and see that someone has had charges. So I feel like if you're transparent with these boys to show them that I look just like you, I was in the same neighborhood as you, and I was tested with the same things that you're going to be tested with if you haven't already been tested with, but I got through it. It's helping a lot of boys raise their heads, hold their heads up a little higher than before. Because as a child, you do want the things that you see on TV. I want the Nike shoe. I mean, the Jordan shoes that just came out. My son asked me for an iPhone every day. He asked, can he pray about the iPhone?
Which one?
He worked for the iPhone. He just want the iPhone. And so we're constantly having a conversation as to, you work towards it, you'll get it. But you have to stay down until you come up. We Black. Like, you're not, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be born up. Your parents have suffered. Your parents have worked 9 to 5 jobs that don't necessarily pay all the bills. Like, we have to be transparent. We have to be real. Life is hard for African-American men and women and children. But we are resilient. We are resilient. And we rise from the oppressions of life. We always have. And so I feel like if we teach our youth that and stay on teaching our youth that even though they fall, you can still get up and do it, then I know that, they'll be triumphant. Sometimes you just have to fall to get up.
One of the things, and I share this with people all the time, the difference between me going down a road that wasn't productive versus one where I am now was because my mother, because I grew up in West Side Savannah, but my mother retired I think I came along late. So I think by the time I was in middle school, she retired. So it was no coming home and playing in the street. It was come home, do your work, go to bed. And it's just so, you got to have that faith and thank God sometimes that you got to understand what I'm trying to say. You got to have faith to know that you're covered by God and to just pray. And that's the one thing we got to teach our young people too is prayer works, and to pray for what you're asking for, but to be patient for God to deliver that blessing, because the blessing will come. But God has ordained something great for you, but it's not going to come overnight. And I'm helping them to understand that faith. And that leads to my next question. Do the churches play a role in this process of mentoring?
Tevin, because I'll be all day.
Do churches play a role in mentoring? I think they can have a part in it or have a hand in it, but also I've noticed that, and I'm gonna speak freely, and I'm also speaking from a child of God, and I'm also speaking from a grandchild of a pastor and I would say a preacher family as well. But I'm just gonna be blank. A lot of churches be avoiding the trauma that actually happens in the community or that's happening under their same roof. And so if the preacher is preaching one thing, but living a totally different life on the outside, that's going to, the kids going to see that. They're going to be like, hold on, wait, I can do the same thing. So I might be able to come to church on Sunday and go do my dirt right after church, and it's not going to bother me. I'm not going to have that. But also at the same time, you got to have faith in the things unseen. And that's the point though. And I think for me, I've been through too much. For me personally, I just been through too much trauma to realize where I'm sitting at in my seat today. They're like, okay, there is a God or there is a spirit for sure. And a lot of people aren't religious, to be honest with you. And a lot of people, not even religious, a lot of people aren't spiritual. And I think that has to come to that, because if you think that your life is just ends when you die, then you've lost, because there's a lot of life. I mean, one thing
Yeah.
that if you want to realize how big the world is, I like to look at the skies. I like to look at the stars. I like to look at the ocean or a large body of water and think like, okay, how long has that been here? Okay,
Exactly.
cool. I've only been here for 28 years, so I don't got all the answers. So it's okay for me to make mistakes, but let me not make the same mistake multiple times and get in a rotation of that, because it, like I said, it results back to habit. So going back to the church piece, I think that is, they should have a hand in it, but also it still takes transparency within the church to kind of speak on different things and to realize that even if I pray 150 times, that trauma may not heal, or that, you know, like I may not have a savior, or this situation may not be a saving. And like I said, I speak from that, from someone who has lost faith and been, I would say, an individual outside of spirituality when my brother passed. I didn't want to hear nothing about that, because I was trying to make it make sense, you know, of like, okay, how does somebody so young, how does this happen to them, and things like that. And the entire time, those are just questions that I have for myself. And it's okay to question God. It's okay to question the life and things like that. But resulting back to our mental health, I went to go get counseling. I went to go get therapy, and I was able to process a lot of the emotions and put my actions in a positive way, where I wasn't going out and acting out in a certain way, right? Because kids act out, adults act out, and it just happens. And I think, but churches really have to do a good job. Our religion, I don't even want to say churches, but religion capacity entities, whatever you want to call it, need to do a better job of being transparent, and also being a place for young kids to kind of come and feel safe, because that's not always been the case.
Mm-hmm. And one thing in the Bible, it says faith without works is dead. So like transparency in the church, and me too, Tevin, I'm the granddaughter of a pastor, the niece of a pastor. And growing up in the church, it's just like your issues, pray about your issues. But we also have to get therapy. We also have to talk about what we've been through. We can pray. You can pray all day long. You can have faith all day long, but if you don't act on your faith, then that's just what it is. It's just faith. And I encourage myself all the time as far as this mentoring program goes, because I can study mentorship all day. I can get on Zoom calls all day. But if I don't get into the community and help these young boys or talk to these young boys, then what I'm doing is in vain, right? And so that's hand in hand with the church, because you stand and you preach about the goodness of the Lord. You stand and you preach about all these good things, but how do you, as a pastor or a preacher, put these things into work? And I'm going to speak freely too. Being a member of a church, and not necessarily an all Black church, but my organization is Mothers of Black Sons. So initially, my pastor felt like I was excluding other races of young men. So my organization wasn't accepted in my church, because in my church, just helping one nationality is just a no-go. And his words were, you're going to have to choose between your organization and the church. I don't have to choose between my organization and the church, because my organization, to me, I feel like is doing what the church should be doing. And it's going into the community and it's talking to these young boys about growing, about their future. Because just like that body of water has been there for years and years and years. Once you leave here, you're not just gone. You know what I mean? And while you're here, you should make use of what has been given unto you. All of us have a sense of choice of rationale. We have the sense of choice. We can choose to live and prosper, or we can choose to not do anything and die, right? So in the church, I felt like you should want an organization to come in and bring young boys in to where they have that relationship with God, because not all young boys have that relationship. I took 15 boys to Savannah in April, and a lot of them had never even been inside of a church. And once they left out, they were so filled because of the fellowship that they got with other young boys. Because
and that
of the
was powerful. That was a powerful.
yeah, because they were able to.
And shout out to
Go ahead,
Robert Jordan, who runs Male Dreamers. But Tiffany, that was a powerful moment. Tell me what happened. Tiffany connected with a brother in Savannah, and they doing a very similar job. But they added a faith-based component. And Tiffany, I want you to talk about that, because that was such a. It was just powerful. Go ahead. I just had to. I'm glad you hit that.
Male Dreamers, Robert Jordan in Savannah, they had a insurrection to resurrection, and it was based on the insurrection back in January, right? When we seen how crazy people went on the Capitol and how it was, basically allowed, whereas the Black Lives Matter movement was not that. March wasn't that long ago, and they had the National Guards out, and so we got the boys together, and they spoke about how they felt when they saw the insurrection and how they feel like they fit in society now because of the insurrection. And there was prayer, there was fellowship. They couldn't sit beside anybody that they knew. They had to sit beside someone that they didn't know. And these boys had just met each other for the first time. And when we left, it was like they had known each other forever. So, and it was in a church. It was in an all-white church. Like, the pastor was white, and the first lady was white, and they accepted all of these Black kids in there, and it was an open dialogue. They weren't saying, you can't say this, you can't do this. Whereas in our churches, we do have that toxic male figure, whereas his way or no way. And I was talking to my cousin earlier, and I was telling her, if you don't know the word for yourself, then it's easy for someone to just come along and tell you that this is what the word says, this is what you need to do, and if you don't do it, you're going to hell. Whereas churches don't preach on going to therapy. Some churches don't. Some churches don't teach about, don't teach about, they won't even have, when they get the children together, it's just a watch a movie and popcorn. Some churches don't even have the patience to deal with their youth. You just get in the choir stand, you sing, get out of the choir stand. Or if you're going to dance, you dance and you move out of the way. But what we need to do is, in the church has to encourage these children, because that same child is going to be the pastor of their church maybe one day, or a deacon of their church maybe one day. And if you're not encouraging them, just like my boys, they're just going to be like, you know what, Mama, we're not going to church today. Yes, you are. But that's just me as a parent. But the church has to stand up. The church has to stand up. If not, then once our grandparents are gone, nobody's going to go to church. It is what it is. A lot of our churches have old time thinking. And you have to evolve. Evolution is a part of life. Exposure is a part of life. If you're not exposed to anything, how are you going to know anything? You know what I mean? You still telling me to just pray, but I'm still in the same fix I was 2 years ago. And God tired of me saying the same prayer. Act on what you're telling me to pray on.
Yeah. And that's when those alternatives come in that 9 times out of 10 we turn to, like the streets, or because that's tangible and you can see things happening or progressing through that. And I've always thought it was very interesting that a lot of young people are dying actually by the Bible code. They actually live by the Bible code, just in a certain different way than what the word actually says. And I just think it's very, very interesting. So I think the word and the message is getting spread, but I guess in a sense where if you're not seeing the good of it kind of come to your life in a way of fulfillment, and you're not and if you're not prepared for it, if you're not doing what you need to do every day to be prepared for that blessing, because a lot of people get blessings, but they're not prepared for that blessing, so they end up losing it. And I think that's where it kind of comes from, as instilling that into them and being consistent, because life works in mysterious ways, and so is God. He moves in mysterious ways, and we don't always have a reason for it. And it's just hard sometimes to constantly hit a wall, and you're praying and nothing is happening. But if you go do whatever and make some money from it, you get some respect, or people look at you a little bit differently, or you feel a little bit more powerful. And I think that's the detrimental part of it. But that was a great question. I really enjoyed that question. That was a great question.
Yeah.
So as we come to a close, I definitely, one of the good things about Watchdogs, and we're on a platform called All Things Relevant Media, is we always have a part 2. So look forward to part 2 to this, but we're coming to a close. But if you all could give us your final comments, your final thoughts for today. Closing comments, I guess.
We just have to, in my mind, and I've gotten over the point where all of my thoughts may seem small, but there is a lyric from Andre 3000 and he was expressing how he could have done better if someone older had told him in advance. Let's be that. Let's be that for our youth. Let's be that person that tells our youth of what can happen or what will happen. If you think with a limited mind, it's 2021. We have no space for limited thinking anymore, for limited movement, limited evolution. There's no such thing as limited evolution. Evolution is limitless. And so let's just be that. Let's be that for our youth. Let's teach our youth the right way to go. Let's encourage our youth on the right way to go. And I feel like with doing that, with being that person in their path, that we can curb so much of teen pregnancies, of addiction at a young age, mass incarceration. I feel like if we could just put ourselves in their path and encourage them, then in the future, just like someone has said about 2050, our youth will be so powerful and so unmovable that it's just teaching our history in schools won't be the only thing that they're trying to stop. You understand? So I just want us to continue to, and Tevin, you're awesome. You're so awesome. Like, you're so awesome.
He's halfway awesome. Yeah. He's a Gator fan, so.
That's all right. Go get I'm gonna keep saying it too. I think I want to close out by saying a quote, since we're on quotes now. One from Nipsey Hussle that I like to live by: "Never let a hard time humble us." And I think that is a powerful line, because life will humble you in different ways, but you cannot let that take away from what you're trying to do. Right. And I also want to encourage deficit thinking, even us holding ourselves accountable, to not always think that we got all the answers, or that thinking that, we got to reach the kids or reach the youth where they are and figure out what works best for them. And another thing, a message to the youth that I would say, there's a whole world out here with different experiences and different lives, and it's up to you to see it. And one thing for me, when I started traveling, when I had the opportunity to travel, it allowed me to see different hoods. I'm like, oh, this place is a little bit more hood than where I'm from, or they got a little bit more opportunity out here where I'm from. But one thing that it showed me is that I put myself here, that I was able to get here to see things, because once you see something, 9 times out of 10, you're never going to be able to see the same again. You cannot have that same thought process. And I would encourage you to do the same. Seek opportunity of new things, to create new experiences that are positive, that are going to enhance your life. And the very last thing, look at your life 1 through 100 and think about if you're 16, like you're only 16% to your completion rate or whatever. So you're okay. Like if you make some mistakes, you know, that's okay. You get a few felonies, that's okay. As long as you have an out date, or even if you don't have an out date, you can still write books. You can still contribute in a positive way. You can still make positive contributions to the community, to the world that you live in. So somebody may not follow your exact footsteps, but you can contribute back to prevent something. And I think that's a major thing that we need to restill, is that because you got a few felonies or because you made a few bad choices does not mean that your life ends here. You can,
That's right, Tim.
contribute back to whatever you want to contribute to. Now that can be positive or negative. Again, you have the choices to make that decision.
All right, so we're going to close out today, and I appreciate both you, Tevin and Tiffany, for joining us, and there'll definitely be a part 2. But I will close with this here. Now, you know, I think last week we had a young man here in the Metro Atlanta area, right over at Cobb County, make a choice, and we talk about choices, and that choice was to end up with 3 murder charges. What could have been different if that young man could have been in a mentoring program at a young age? What difference could we make as churches, civic organizations, whatever organization you are, to make a difference in a child's life? We know that mentoring programs work. The research says it. And so I just call on our organizations to take a deep look in your community and what can you do different? Don't wait on someone else to do it. We have a young lady right here who answered God's call as a woman to do this. And so we've got to start stepping up to the plate and making a change in our communities before we lose our communities in a way when we could have saved them. So thank you, Tiffany and Tevin. Thank you to our viewers. We'll be back next Saturday. Hopefully we'll have Mayor Hall, and speaking that into existence. We'll have Julius Hall back with us. So next Saturday at noon, we'll be here for the Watchdogs. And again, thank y'all too for joining us today.
Thank you, Robert, for having me.
Have a great week now.